Imagine this. A vast, mist-covered battlefield. The clashing roar of steel, the thunder of hooves, warriors shouting oaths of loyalty, blades flashing in the morning sun. Samurai, armored in honor, bound by Bushido, charging forward with unshakable courage. Now, erase that scene in your mind, and replace it with the whine of bullets cutting through the air. The deafening roar of machine guns. The smell of smoke, oil, and gunpowder. World War II. Two worlds collide in your imagination. Ancient warriors versus the modern engines of destruction. But here's the question. Could honor, loyalty, and the human spirit stand against the cold efficiency of mechanized warfare? Could a samurai, who would face death with grace, survive the steel hail of a German MG-42, or the relentless fire of an American Browning? This is not just a battle of weapons, it's a clash of eras. A fight between belief and brutality. A war between swords forged in ritual, and machines built for mass death. And the deeper question lingers. What did humanity lose when honor gave way to firepower? And what, if anything, did it gain? Prepare yourself, because this journey will pit Bushido against Blitzkrieg. Samurai versus machine guns. Honor versus survival. What happens when knights, Spartans, and horsemen march into a world of tanks? Picture a battlefield drowned in shadows, the air heavy with silence before the storm. Across the field stand warriors from ages long past. Gleaming knights clad in steel, their banners fluttering, lances poised for the charge. Beside them, disciplined Spartans tighten their shields into an unbreakable wall, their spears bristling like a sea of iron. On the horizon, Mongol horsemen circle restlessly, their bows strung, their arrows whispering death with every draw. For a heartbeat, it feels as though time has folded, gathering the greatest warriors of history in one place. But then, listen closely, the distant rumble begins. It is not the hooves of horses, not the march of sandals or the clink of armor. It is the grinding roar of tanks, the mechanical growl of engines, the unmistakable clatter of machine guns being set in place. The past is about to collide with the most destructive war humanity has ever fought. And the question burns. What happens when the greatest armies of history face the unforgiving machinery of World War II? To understand the scale of this clash, we must first step into the world of the night. For centuries, armored cavalry dominated the battlefields of Europe. The knight was the hammer of medieval warfare, his armor turning him into a near-invulnerable figure, his lance capable of shattering enemy lines in a single charge. He embodied not just strength, but chivalry, a code of honor that, like Bushido, defined how wars were fought. But the knight's greatest strength was also his downfall. His armor, heavy and slow, was designed for swords and arrows, not bullets. In the face of a machine gun, the very steel that once made him untouchable would become a coffin. A lance charge across open ground, once the most feared maneuver, would be little more than a death run under a hail of gunfire. What once broke armies would be cut down before it even reached the enemy line. Yet knights were more than just cavalry. They fought in sieges, commanded fortresses, and inspired loyalty. In a world of machine guns and artillery, could the knight's mastery of fortification provide a chance of survival? Castles, once impenetrable, would crumble under the fury of tanks and bombs. Stone walls that had withstood catapults for centuries would split like kindling under explosive shells. The knight's strength was never designed for a world where destruction reigned from the sky. His valor, his chivalry, would remain, but the tools of his age would betray him. Turn now to the Spartans. The men of Thermopylae, immortalized for standing against impossible odds. Their discipline, their phalanx formation, their belief in fighting shoulder to shoulder, these were the qualities that made them legendary. In their own time, no force could easily break them. Their wall of shields was both weapon and defense, their courage unshakable. But imagine that shield wall standing against a barrage of mortars, or strafing runs from fighter planes. The phalanx depended on cohesion, on unity, on resisting the pressure of men and steel. But in the chaos of World War II, cohesion was shattered not by brute force but by explosions tearing men apart before the enemy even reached them. Still, we must not dismiss the Spartans so quickly. Their genius lay not only in their formation, but in their psychology. They fought not merely for victory, but for defiance. Their stand at Thermopylae was a statement to history, that even in certain death, courage can echo louder than conquest. In this way, perhaps the Spartans would have found kinship with the soldiers of World War II, many of whom faced impossible odds with the same grim determination. The weapons may have changed, but the spirit, the unyielding will to resist, remained eternal. And then, there were the Mongols. Unlike knights or Spartans, they thrived on mobility, on speed, on the terror of constant movement. Their horses carried them across continents. Their bows could strike with deadly precision while riding at full gallop. They were not bound to fortresses or formations. They were ghosts on the battlefield, appearing from nowhere, vanishing before their enemies could respond. In their own time, they were unstoppable, conquerors who reshaped the world. But against World War II, their advantage collapses. For what are horses against tanks? What is mobility against airplanes that can cross the same distance in a fraction of the time? A Mongol horde thundering across the steppe would be spotted from the air, strafed by machine guns, bombed into scattering chaos. Their bows, unmatched in skill, would be useless against armored vehicles. Their tactics, so revolutionary in the 13th century, would be obsolete against mechanized war. Yet once again, the question lingers. Is warfare only about weapons? Or is it about adaptation? The Mongols were not just riders, they were innovators. They learned from every enemy they faced, adopting technologies, absorbing strategies, reshaping themselves to remain superior. If the Mongols had lived to see the machine gun, the tank, the bomber, could they have learned to use them faster than their enemies? History shows us they might have. Their empire thrived on innovation. Perhaps of all the ancient warriors, the Mongols stand the best chance of surviving the leap into the industrial battlefield. When we set these warriors against the storm of World War II, one truth becomes clear. The weapons of the past could not endure the machines of the present. Armor splits, shields shatter, horses fall. But what endures is the spirit. The knight's chivalry, the Spartan's defiance, the Mongol's adaptability. These are qualities that echo into every war, even the mechanized slaughter of the 20th century. But here lies the haunting thought. If the warriors of the past could not survive the weapons of World War II, could the soldiers of World War II survive the battles of the past? Imagine a machine gunner standing alone against a Spartan phalanx, his weapon powerful but his ammunition limited. Imagine a tank crew ambushed by Mongols who melt into the night, only to strike again at dawn. Imagine a paratrooper dropped into a medieval castle siege, cut off from supply lines, surrounded by men who fight for honor, not survival. In such reversals, the certainty of modern dominance begins to blur. The past and present are not so easily divided. And so, we are left once again in the grip of curiosity. The clash of ages reveals not only what is lost, but what endures. And as we move deeper into this journey, another question rises like smoke on the horizon. If knights, Spartans, and Mongols were tested by World War II's machines, what of the leaders who commanded them? For battles are not fought by warriors alone, they are shaped by the minds who guide them. What would happen if history's greatest generals met on the stage of World War II? Would Alexander outmaneuver Rommel? Would Napoleon's ambition match the scale of Hitler's blitzkrieg? Could Genghis Khan's strategies bend against the might of aircraft and submarines? The battlefield awaits their arrival. The clash of leaders is coming, and it will test not only weapons, but genius itself. Could a sword of honor stop a storm of bullets? The battlefield is a place where time collapses, where centuries of tradition can shatter in the blink of an eye. Close your eyes and imagine it. A warrior dressed in lacquered armor, his helmet gleaming, his katana sharpened by rituals as old as his bloodline. He takes a breath, steady and calm, for he knows that death is never a stranger. He whispers his oath, grips the hilt of his sword, and steps forward into destiny. Now imagine, across the same field, another figure waits. He wears no ornate armor. His uniform is rugged, practical. His face is shadowed beneath a steel helmet. And instead of a blade, he carries a weapon that spits fire and metal faster than the eye can track. He has never met the samurai, never studied Bushido, but he too has prepared for this day. His machine gun is loaded. His finger rests against the trigger. And when the moment comes, he will not fight one man at a time. he will unleash a storm upon all who charge. This is where honor collides with firepower. Where centuries of battlefield evolution meet in one impossible question. Could the code of the samurai withstand the reality of mechanized war? To understand this clash, we must first step into the heart of the samurai world. For the samurai were not merely soldiers. They were bound to a code that shaped every thought, every movement, every life they touched. Bushido, the way of the warrior, was not just about fighting. It was about how to live, and above all, how to die. Death, to the samurai, was not a defeat. It was an inevitability embraced with grace. They believed that courage meant standing against overwhelming odds, not with the expectation of victory, but with the certainty of honor. Their tactics reflected this belief. Samurai battles were not fought with anonymity. They were fought with identity. Warriors carried banners bearing their family crests. They announced their names before charging, proclaiming who they were to friend and foe alike. Every strike of the blade was personal, every clash of spears an intimate dance of death. Victories were not only measured in survival, but in the glory of how one faced the end. Now, contrast this with the soldiers of World War II. The battlefield they knew was a place stripped of individuality. Men fought not as lone warriors, but as parts of machines larger than themselves. Strategy was no longer about single combat. It was about firepower, coordination, supply chains, and technology. Soldiers rarely saw the eyes of the men they killed. Distance, speed, and overwhelming force turned death into something impersonal. It was not honor that mattered most, it was efficiency. The samurai believed in the charge, in closing the distance, in bringing their blade to the enemy's body. But by the time of World War II, closing that distance was a death sentence. A samurai charging across an open field would face the rattle of rifles, the burst of automatic fire, and the unrelenting rain of artillery. Even the most disciplined warrior, the most fearless, would crumble beneath the steel hail before his sword ever tasted blood. And yet, there is something fascinating in imagining the collision. Because what the samurai lacked in technology, they made up for in spirit. Their discipline, their unity, their willingness to die. These are qualities that soldiers of every era have admired. Could such qualities have allowed them to adapt, even against the machines of modern war? To answer that, we must look deeper into how battles were fought. In feudal Japan, warfare was as much about ritual as it was about strategy. Armies often faced one another across open fields. The first clashes might begin with arrows, but the heart of the battle came when warriors closed in, sword against sword, spear against spear. Leaders, visible and vocal, rode among their men, urging them on. And though blood flowed freely, there remained a sense of order, of structure, a deadly choreography built on honor. In World War II, that order was shattered by the chaos of industrial war. Battles stretched across miles. Airplanes screamed overhead. Tanks rolled forward with crushing inevitability. Artillery fell from unseen hands miles away. Soldiers dug into trenches and foxholes, clinging to survival while invisible enemies rained destruction from afar. The battlefield was no longer a dance, it was a storm. A storm of steel, smoke, and fire. Imagine a samurai stepping into that storm. His armor, designed to deflect arrows and blades, would crumble under the impact of a bullet. His sword, unmatched in craftsmanship, would find no path through the steel skin of a tank. His banner, carried proudly, would serve only as a target for the enemy's aim. His courage, undeniable though it may be, would be swallowed by the sound of machines. And yet, even as we admit this grim reality, we cannot dismiss the question entirely. For warfare is not only about weapons, it is about will. During World War II, Japanese soldiers carried with them echoes of their samurai ancestors. The spirit of Bushido did not vanish. It lived on in their determination, in the infamous charges known as bonsai attacks, where men hurled themselves at enemy lines with little hope of survival. Though machine guns cut them down, the sheer ferocity of their advance struck fear into those who witnessed it. Honor could not win against bullets, but it could still terrify, still inspire, still demand respect. So perhaps the answer lies not in whether the samurai could survive the machine gun, but in whether the machine gun could kill what the samurai represented. Honor, discipline, sacrifice, These are things that cannot be pierced by bullets. They live on in memory, in legacy, in the stories we tell long after the battlefield has gone silent. But here is the haunting truth. If a samurai, bound by honor, faced a soldier bound by survival, the clash would not last long. The machine would prevail. The storm of bullets would end the charge. The battlefield would belong to modernity. And yet, the samurai would not vanish. For even in defeat, he would embody a spirit untouched by the march of time. A spirit that reminds us that war is not only about who wins, but about what values endure. And so we are left with a question that lingers like smoke after gunfire. What truly matters on the battlefield? The power to kill, or the courage to face death? The answer waits in the next step of our journey. For the samurai's code was not the only ancient way to collide with the modern storm. Other warriors, from other times, also faced the impossible. But how did their tactics compare when set against the engines of World War II? Could knights in armor, Spartan phalanxes, or Mongol horsemen fare any better? Or would the machine gun, cold and unyielding, crush them all the same? What happens when the greatest generals in history meet the masters of World War II? Imagine a tent lit by flickering lanterns, maps spread across wooden tables, voices murmuring in languages separated by centuries. Around this table sit figures who never should have met. Alexander the Great, his eyes burning with ambition, fingers tracing routes of conquest across unknown lands. Napoleon Bonaparte, restless, his mind calculating the angles of cannon fire and the speed of forced marches. Genghis Khan, silent but watchful, already imagining how to bend the battlefield into a weapon of his will. And then, enter the commanders of World War II. Rommel, the desert fox, sharp and calculating, his strategies as fluid as sand. Eisenhower, steady, a master of coordination and coalition. Zhukov, relentless, his iron will forged in the fires of Stalingrad. Imagine their eyes meeting across the table. Centuries collapse. The masters of old and new lock gazes. And the question rises, trembling in the air like the smoke of war itself. Who would prevail if genius from every age collided on the same battlefield? To understand this confrontation, we must first see how the ancients fought. Alexander's brilliance was not in sheer numbers, but in the way he bent men to his vision. His phalanx was not just a formation, it was an extension of his ambition. With long spears and iron discipline, he carved empires before he had lived half a life. But place his phalanx against tanks rolling across a battlefield, and the formation collapses. Yet Alexander was more than his spearmen. He was speed. He was daring. He struck where no one expected, crossing rivers thought impassable, launching attacks at impossible hours. Would not such audacity find its echo in the Blitzkrieg, that lightning strike of armored divisions and dive bombers? Perhaps Alexander would not resist World War II. Perhaps he would thrive in it, seizing its machines as tools to extend his own restless conquest. Napoleon, too, built his legacy on speed and shock. He reshaped the art of movement, using massed artillery and swift maneuvers to crush enemies before they could form lines. He thrived on unpredictability, on bending the rules of the battlefield until they broke in his favor. But in the age of machine guns and trenches, how would his genius translate? Some argue that Napoleon was already a prophet of modern war, his artillery the ancestor of the howitzer, his emphasis on supply lines a foretelling of mechanized logistics. Imagine him with tanks at his disposal. Imagine his armies not marching on foot but carried by armored columns. His cannons replaced by long-range artillery. His cavalry charges replaced by fighter planes diving from the sky. His genius might not only survive in World War II, it might set the pace. But there is also the shadow. For Napoleon, like Hitler a century later, was undone by ambition, by overreaching into the frozen heart of Russia. Genius may shine, but pride consumes. Would he repeat the same fatal error even with modern machines? The thought lingers like the frost on a soldier's uniform. And then there is Genghis Khan. A man whose empire stretched farther than any before it, built not on castles or cities but on speed, terror, and adaptability. His horsemen moved like the wind, striking with precision, disappearing before retaliation. His brilliance lay not just in battle, but in strategy, deception, feigned retreats, psychological warfare. In a world of tanks and airplanes, horses might fail him. But what of his mind? Imagine Genghis Khan commanding tanks as if they were his riders, sending armored columns sweeping across continents with the same relentless momentum that once carried his hordes. Imagine him using bombers as his new terror from the skies. Would any army of World War II resist such relentless fury? Perhaps not. Perhaps the Mongol spirit, reborn in steel and fire, would eclipse even the darkest blitzkrieg. Now place them against the commanders of World War II. Rommel, with his mastery of desert warfare, using tanks as if they were cavalry, striking swiftly, vanishing, striking again. Could Alexander outwit him? Could Napoleon overwhelm him? Could Genghis Khan match him move for move, dust storm for dust storm? Then consider Eisenhower, not a man of dazzling battlefield genius, but a master of coordination, of holding together nations with fragile unity. He was not the warrior who led charges. He was the architect who made sure the armies of the world moved as one. Against him, how would the solitary brilliance of Alexander or Napoleon hold? Could even a Khan defeat the power of alliance, the industrial might of nations bound by purpose? And then Zhukov, the iron hammer of Russia. He did not dazzle with elegance. He endured. He absorbed the blows of the strongest enemy and returned them with double force. At Stalingrad, he bled an army until its will broke. At Berlin, he crushed the last defenses with unrelenting power. Against such resolve, what would Napoleon's maneuvers mean? What would Alexander's daring strikes achieve? Would even the cunning of Genghis Khan break a man who could endure such devastation and still advance? Zhukov was not brilliance alone. He was inevitability made flesh. But let us not imagine these men only as rivals. What if they stood side by side? Imagine Alexander's daring fused with Rommel's cunning. Imagine Napoleon's logistics joined to Eisenhower's coordination. Imagine Genghis Khan's relentless drive sharpened by Zhukov's iron will. The battlefield itself might not survive. For war is not only about who wins, it is about how far ambition dares to reach. And so, the deeper truth emerges. The clash of commanders reveals something beyond weapons and strategies. It reveals the eternal struggle between genius and circumstance. Alexander thrived because of the world he inherited, just as Rommel thrived because of the desert he fought in. Napoleon rose on the tide of revolution. Eisenhower rose on the unity of nations. Genghis Khan thrived on the steppes, Zhukov in the ruins of cities. Genius is never born in a vacuum. It is shaped by the world around it. Place any of them in another age, and brilliance may shine, or it may break. Still, one haunting question remains. If the great generals of the past and present were forced into a single battlefield, with equal tools, equal armies, equal machines, who would stand at the end? Would it be the daring strike of Alexander, the relentless wave of Genghis Khan, the maneuvering brilliance of Napoleon, the cunning of Rommel, the endurance of Zhukov, or the steady hand of Eisenhower? Or would the battlefield itself consume them all, proving that no genius can master the chaos of war forever? As the lanterns flicker in that imagined tent, as the eyes of centuries meet, the question lingers like smoke. Can genius survive when the world itself becomes the enemy? And if not, what truly decides the fate of armies? Strategy, technology, or the sheer will of men to endure? What is the true price when honor and firepower devour humanity? Imagine the sound. Not of swords clashing, not of banners snapping in the wind, not even of gunfire, but of silence. A silence broken only by the weeping of a mother searching for her child among the ruins of her village. A silence punctured by the groans of the wounded left behind on the battlefield, their cries swallowed by the night. This is the sound of war's cost, not measured in victories or defeats, but in lives shattered, in souls broken, in generations scarred forever. And so the question stands, what is the true price when honor and firepower devour humanity? When we look at the samurai, their code of Bushido shaped not only how they fought, but how they lived and died. Death was not to be feared, but embraced with dignity. To fall in battle was the highest honor. To commit seppuku, ritual suicide, was a way of preserving dignity when defeat loomed. For the warrior, this was noble. But what of the farmer whose land was trampled underfoot, whose family starved when armies swept through? For civilians in feudal Japan, honor was not protection. Villages were burned, rice was taken, and lives were torn apart in the name of a lord's ambition. The suffering of the powerless was the silent foundation upon which samurai glory was built. Now shift to the world of World War II. Here, the suffering did not linger only in the shadows. It erupted into the forefront of the war itself. Civilians were no longer caught in the crossfire by accident. They became deliberate targets. Entire cities burned under relentless bombing raids. Homes crumbled into ash beneath the firestorms of Dresden and Tokyo. Families disappeared overnight in the silence of concentration camps. Unlike in the time of the samurai, where destruction spread village by village, World War II carried devastation on an industrial scale. The suffering was vast, impersonal, and often planned. The true horror of modern war was not only the battlefield, it was the factory of death built beyond it. And yet, through the veil of time, there is a haunting similarity. In every age, it is those without swords or guns who pay the heaviest price. The farmer in Japan, the villager in Europe, the child in the Pacific, all bore scars deeper than any soldier's blade. War always promised glory to those who wielded power, but it always demanded agony from those who had none. Consider for a moment the soldiers themselves. A samurai went to battle knowing his name, his family, his legacy would be remembered if he died with honor. Death was expected, even embraced. But a soldier of World War II lived in a different kind of fear. For him, death often came unseen, a bullet from a hidden sniper, a shell from miles away, a bomb falling from the night sky. There was no ritual to prepare him, no code to dignify his end. Death was sudden, chaotic, anonymous. Men disappeared in fire and rubble, their names forgotten in the churn of industrial slaughter. Yet, even in that anonymity, courage remained. Letters sent home to loved ones carried the same spirit of sacrifice, the same longing for dignity, as the samurai's final bow. The costumes changed, the weapons changed, but the human heart remained the same. It is in the stories of survivors, too, that the cost reveals itself. In feudal Japan, widows rebuilt villages, sons carried the names of fathers who fell, honor passed from one generation to the next. In World War II, survivors wandered through shattered cities, piecing together lives from rubble, clutching photos of those who never returned. The weight of survival is sometimes heavier than the burden of death. To live on when everything is lost, this is its own form of sacrifice. But perhaps the most haunting comparison lies in the aftermath. After a samurai battle, the land bore scars, but in time rice fields grew again, castles rose once more, life continued under the same rhythm of tradition. After World War II, the world itself was changed forever. Cities did not simply rebuild, they reinvented. Borders shifted. Powers rose and fell. The shadow of the atomic bomb hung over humanity like a ghost that never leaves. For the first time, the cost of war was not only immediate, it stretched into the future, reshaping how entire civilizations thought about life, death, and survival. And so we are left with a terrible truth. The price of war is never only in the lives lost, it is in the innocence stolen, the humanity eroded, the hope that crumbles under fire. Whether by sword or by machine gun, by castle siege or by bombing raid, the story is always the same. War consumes more than it ever gives back. But another question rises from the smoke. If the cost is so great, why do we keep fighting? Why do humans, across centuries, return again and again to the battlefield, knowing the agony it will bring? Is it ambition? Survival? Honor? Or something deeper still? Something in our very nature that drives us to destroy, even as we long for peace? This question pulls us forward into the final step of our journey. For to understand the clash between samurai honor and mechanized firepower, knights and tanks, Spartans and mortars, generals and commanders, we must ask not only how wars are fought, but why. The heart of the battlefield is not in weapons, it is in the human soul. And in the end, that is where the answer must lie. Why do we keep fighting when we know the cost will never be paid in full? The battlefield is quiet now. The clash of swords has faded. The roar of cannons has gone silent. The skies, once darkened by bombers, are clear again. And yet, the question lingers like smoke after fire. Why? Why do humans return to war, century after century, age after age, knowing the devastation it brings, knowing the price will never truly be repaid? Why do we march forward even as graves multiply behind us? Perhaps the answer begins with honor. For the samurai, war was not only survival, it was identity. To fight was to live with meaning. To fall was to seal one's name in memory. The sword was not just a weapon, it was the spirit of the warrior, a sacred bond between man and destiny. Honor gave suffering purpose. And in that purpose, men found the courage to face overwhelming odds. But what happens when honor collides with the machinery of modern war, where bullets care nothing for courage, where bombs erase entire cities without distinguishing between the brave and the cowardly? Does honor survive, or does it crumble in the face of cold efficiency? In World War II, fragments of that ancient spirit remained. Soldiers carried codes of loyalty and courage, often unspoken but deeply felt. A Marine clutching his rifle in the Pacific, a pilot bracing for his final dive, a resistance fighter in the shadows of occupied Europe, each held within them echoes of Bushido, of chivalry, of Spartan resolve. Yet they fought not only for honor, but for survival, for nations, for futures that hung in the balance. Their courage was less about ritual and more about endurance. Less about seeking death with dignity, more about clinging to life in chaos. And still, humanity pushes forward. Ambition drives it. Power tempts it. The hunger to control, to conquer, to reshape the world in one's own vision has burned since the dawn of civilization. Alexander sought glory across continents. Napoleon dreamed of empires without end. Genghis Khan rode to the edge of the known world. And in World War II, dictators sought dominion not with swords, but with factories, armies, and machines of destruction. The ambition never changes. Only the tools evolve. But beyond ambition lies fear. Nations go to war not only to expand, but to protect. To shield their people from imagined or real threats. To strike before they are struck. To endure in a world that feels hostile. Fear drives alliances, invasions, preemptive strikes. Fear whispers that if one does not fight today, they may not live to fight tomorrow. It was fear that pushed men into trenches, fear that sent planes into the skies, fear that built the atomic bomb. And once fear and ambition entwine, war becomes inevitable. Yet, within this inevitability, humanity clings to hope. Hope that the struggle, however bloody, will lead to peace. That one last sacrifice will prevent another. That one final war will end all wars. But history shows us the cruel irony. Every war fought with that hope in mind only sows the seeds of the next. The samurai fought to secure their lord's lands, and centuries later, the sons of Japan charged into machine gun fire with cries of loyalty. Europe's knights fought for crowns and faith, and centuries later, Europe's cities burned under the thunder of bombs. The cycle never ends. Hope inspires, but war devours it. And so the deeper truth emerges. War is not only about weapons, honor, or ambition. War is about humanity itself, its flaws, its desires, its contradictions. We crave peace, yet we glorify conflict. We honor the warrior, yet we mourn the dead. We say war is the last resort, but again and again, it becomes the first. Perhaps war is not only something humanity wages, but something humanity carries within itself. Still, something remains. Even in the darkest storms of history, there is light. The samurai's honor, the knight's chivalry, the Spartan's defiance, the Mongol's ingenuity, the soldier's sacrifice in World War II, all these remind us that war is not only destruction. It is also the stage upon which humanity's greatest qualities are tested. Courage, loyalty, resilience, sacrifice. These are born in the fire of conflict, and they endure even when the weapons change. The machine gun may kill the samurai's charge, but it cannot erase the idea that some things are worth dying for. So perhaps the question is not whether honor survives against machine guns, but how it transforms. The battlefield may evolve, but the spirit remains. Honor does not vanish, it adapts. From the sword to the rifle, from the lance to the tank, from the shield wall to the trench line, humanity carries forward the same unyielding desire to find meaning in the face of death. And now, as we stand in a world still scarred by the memory of World War II, we must ask ourselves, what have we learned? The machines have only grown deadlier. The weapons now at humanity's fingertips can erase entire nations in moments. If samurai honor could not withstand machine guns, can human honor withstand the shadow of nuclear fire? Or have we reached a place where survival itself is the only code left? The silence of the battlefield answers softly, in echoes that drift across centuries. We fight because we are human. We endure because we are human. We dream of peace even as we prepare for war, because we are human. And though the weapons change, though the storms grow louder, though the cost grows heavier, there will always be those who cling to honor, to courage, to sacrifice, even in the face of overwhelming firepower. The samurai's sword may never stop a bullet. The knight's armor may never withstand a shell. The Spartan's shield may never block a bomb. And yet, somehow, the spirit behind them endures. That is what survives. That is what remains. So as you step back from this battlefield of imagination, ask yourself, what truly wins wars? Is it the machines we build, or the meaning we give to the struggle? If honor can live on even after the sword has fallen, perhaps it has already outlasted every weapon we have ever made. And with that thought, the battlefield fades into silence once more. The warriors of every age retreat into memory. The machines rust. The smoke clears. And what lingers is the question that will haunt humanity for as long as it exists. When the next war comes, and it always comes, will we choose honor, or will we let the machines decide for us?